Once upon a time there were two children, Jim and Hilary. They were brother and sister, as close as brother and sister could possibly be, within reason. One day they were walking down an old country lane together, picking blackberries to make delicious blackberry jam. It was their favourite treat. On this day, they spotted a barn off on one side of the road. They had never seen it before, so this struck them as odd, because they used this road often. They spied an old gentleman exiting the barn, rather shiftily, looking from side to side, checking to see if anyone was watching him. He pulled the barn door closed behind him and walked around the side of it. They did not see which way he went after that, for he was out of sight. The two children decided to investigate, for they were the inquisitive sort. Hilary slowly tugged on the barn door, and to her surprise, it opened with minimal effort. Jim stayed back, cautious of the old man that they had seen, but he was nowhere in sight. Hilary edged into the barn, slowly, being careful not to arouse suspicion from anyone who might be watching. As she entered, she spotted a small basket in the middle of the floor. Most of the floor was covered in nothing but straw, so this basket stood out. In it were a variety of fruits: bananas, apples, strawberries, and grapes. Jim followed her into the barn hurriedly. He too spied the basket, and he was the first to approach it, warily. He picked up a strawberry, had a good long look at it, sniffed it, and after determining that nothing was wrong with it, placed it into his mouth. His teeth came down on the plump fruit, and the delicious juices flowed down his throat. He informed Hilary that the fruit was good, and that she should join him in consuming some of it. Hilary picked up a grape, but upon closer inspection, turned her nose up at it. She declared that it was a seedless grape, the most pointless of all grapes. She enjoyed eating grapes with seeds in them, because she would spit them out at passers-by. This caused her great amusement, despite the constant reprimands from her family not to do so. She threw the seedless grape onto the ground and stomped on it with her foot, crushing it utterly. Its pathetic juices spread out across the barn floor, never to touch a human taste bud. Jim was slightly more enthusiastic about the fruit, and he continued to eat various pieces of it, until there was very little left in the basket. He looked behind him and saw that it was starting to get dark outside, and he told Hilary that perhaps they should head home. They didn't want to be out in the barn in the middle of nowhere late at night, especially with a suspicious-looking old man somewhere nearby. Hilary agreed, and they departed the barn, leaving the now barely full fruit basket on the ground. They did not see the old man as they left, and they did not see him on the way home. When they got home, they had their dinner, and their mother was suspicious as to why they didn't eat more of it. Chicken and potatoes remained on their plates, and normally they were quite healthy eaters. They could normally polish off an entire meal with no trouble whatsoever. On this occasion, they were full of fruit, but their mother was not to know this. As Jim lay in bed, his stomach began to hurt a little. Sharp pains round about, He suspected that he had consumed too much fruit and thought nothing more of it. He attempted to go to sleep. Hilary, on the other hand, felt no such pain. She was able to immediately drift off, until she began to have nightmares. She dreamt that she was walking down a lane, entering a barn, picking fruit, and then insulting the fruit, just as had happened the previous day. On this occasion, as she left the barn, the suspicious-looking old man approached her, and in hurried tones warned her. He said to her, "Someone has insulted the great fruit of the barn." "Was it you?" She replied, "No, it was not." The suspicious old man seemed satisfied with her answer, and did not converse with her further. This is when the dream became a nightmare. As Hilary walked back along the lane, an enormous grape appeared before her. She recognized it at once as the seedless grape that she had so frivolously tossed aside and trampled into the filth. The grape stood over 25 feet tall, towering above her, and in a loud, booming voice, it said, "You crushed me, little girl. Perhaps it is time that I returned the favor." She turned tail and fled as fast as she could back towards the barn. She entered and searched frantically on the ground for the seedless grape that she had so mercilessly destroyed, but she could not find it anywhere. She turned back and sensed the grape lumbering towards the barn. A shadow was cast through the door in the shape of a grape, but it was at this point that she woke. She found herself in a cold sweat and immediately jumped up and ran into the room of her brother to see if he had suffered a similar nightmare. She pushed on Jim's shoulder and tried to rouse him, unsuccessfully. She turned him over and looked at his face before turning away in horror. Jim was dead, his eyes wide open, a look of sheer terror etched across his face. His fingers twisted and mangled and distorted. It was as though he had been frightened to death. Hilary immediately turned back and left the room. She barged through the door of her parents' room and prodded them repeatedly on the back. They too were difficult to rouse, and she feared the worst, until her mother sat upright and said to her, "Hilary, what is the matter with you? You look as though you've seen a ghost." Hilary explained that her brother was dead, and her mother immediately shot out of bed and ran into Jim's bedroom. She came back, not in tears, but with a look of anger on her face. "Hilary," she said, "you lied to me. Your brother is fine. How dare you? Don't you ever do that again, little girl." Hilary ran back into her brother's room and found Jim sitting up, looking confused. But then she noticed something. She looked deep into his eyes. Those were not eyeballs at all. They were seedless grapes. The end.